it's true. A lot of things are out of our control. The one thing that is in your control is yourself to some degree, how you think and the choices you make, whether I'm coaching with an executive from a Fortune 500 or a student that's just trying to figure out their next steps. The formula for coaching is the same, actually. And we really focus on what's in your control. And so to me, leading via your actions is starting within yourself. Yes, conventionally, we would say that's someone that's influencing others, but I do think there's this self-leadership component that I've gone further and further down the rabbit hole about, because I think it starts there, and your capacity to do that for yourself hugely impacts your ability to lead and manage others.
So today my podcast guest is Kalyna Miletic. She's a multifaceted entrepreneur, coach, author, and podcast host. And I spoke with Kalyna on her podcast quite a long time ago, maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. It was a while ago. It was when I was first starting my podcast. And she's got come back to me now and said, let's have another discussion. I have more to talk about. So let's get started. Welcome to my podcast, Kalyna.
Thanks so much for having me, and I'm glad we can be in discussion again. It has been a while.
Yes, that's really, really nice. So can you tell my listeners about your various roles as entrepreneur, as business owner, as author, podcast host? You have lots going on.
Yes, lots of hats. Keeps things exciting. I've got a Canadian business which is Kickstart Your Work, and that's career and leadership development coaching. And so I really have focused in on helping people to build careers that feel aligned and are meaningful. And so I started that in 2016. And then I have an American business, Chiefly, where we're investigating how AI can support emotional and mostly emotional related outcomes in meetings. So a meeting like this, we'd be looking at tone of voice, we'd be looking at eye movements and word choice, and we'd be trying to discern stress levels, happiness, anger, different emotions. And so that's on the American side, lots of research. I'm definitely not on the data scientist side, but more of the creative side. I noticed that there was a real need for bringing a human component to all of the tech stuff. So those are the two businesses I work on right now. And then the book is memorable. It's on the career side. So again, finding a career that really matters to you and a contribution more than career, really, because I think our contribution changes over the course of our lives. It's not just at work. And the podcast interviews people I find fascinating and focuses on self-leadership. So really leading via your daily actions. So those are the main projects at the moment, along with growing a human.
Uh-huh. So you're expecting a baby.
Yes, yes. It's been a long, long journey to get here. And I'm at 36 weeks now. And my husband and I are very, very excited and feeling.
Oh, you must be. And you're getting ready. You know, that's the thing about the last part, the third trimester. You wonder in the first trimester, how am I ever going to do this? How am I ever going to be ready to have a baby? But by the time you get to the third trimester, you're like, okay, we've been doing this for a while now. It's time to move on. It's time to have this baby. Are
That's
you to that point yet?
Yes, and the sleep, I find my sleep is interrupted, so I feel like it's
Mhm.
preparing me for the sleep deprivation for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, we're going to talk about that more. But I think we'll start with
Sorry, I shouldn't be doing that.
that's okay.
Sake. How do I? It's closed. I don't know. Oh, no. Remove from dock.
Yeah, yeah, that's all right.
Yeah, it's off. My messages app is off, but I don't know why it continues to. No, no, it's my Mac. It's but I closed messages. It's still giving me. Yeah, is that at the top, Ian? I think so. Oh, yes. Ooh, I don't see a moon, but I see. Okay, focus. Let's focus. Okay, until this evening. should be. I thought closing it would do it, but thank you.
That's good. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about leading versus daily actions, because you made that a specific topic of discussion. And I think leadership is very, it's a niche for people. That not everybody is a leader, but maybe you see it in a different way. So why don't you tell me?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because conventionally, most people would think if they have an employer or they're not a manager that they're not a leader. And my whole thought process behind that is it's true. A lot of things are out of our control. The one thing that is in your control is yourself to some degree, how you think and the choices you make. And so whether I'm coaching with an executive from a Fortune 500 or a student that's just trying to figure out their next steps, the formula for coaching is the same actually, and we really focus on what's in your control. And so to me, leading via your actions is starting within yourself, no matter if you manage, a huge corporation or you're just trying to manage yourself. I do believe it starts with you. And so leader, yes, conventionally we would say that's someone that's influencing others, but I do think there's this self leadership component that I've gone further and further down the rabbit hole about, because I think it starts there, and your capacity to do that for yourself hugely impacts your ability to lead and manage others. I think
Oh,
that.
okay. Well,
So
that's interesting. So this might be more in keeping with an individual pursuit and what you're going to do in your life and how you're going to go about it and what your relationships are going to be like. Yeah.
yeah, I started in the career space and have certainly focused there with more corporate coaching. But the more I mean, it's been almost 10, it's been 8 years. And the more I go, I realize, again, no matter someone's position, they're also leading in their relationships and with their health and with their interests. And if they have kids, the parenting side. And so it does feel like a more personal equation that needs to be considered versus just something that's done at work. And of course, if different parts of your life are going off track, it's really hard to still show up at work. So I do find it's not, if you're a great leader but your family life is a mess, or if you kind of just, if you lead well with strangers but then you behave differently at home, it's incongruent. And so I think the integrity there to be generally the same across the board is really important, and that's what creates people to actually have satisfaction. So yes, personally and professionally, being able to show up as a unified individual person of integrity. And that's hard. People really do change. I know it's important to change based on the context. You might not treat your toddler the same way you deal with someone at work, but your core values and the way that you show up, I think, should be generally the same, even if word choice or the amount you speak is varied.
Yeah. Well, I would think that if you weren't the same, then you would be someone who was putting on a front, and
Hmm.
it's hard to be. It's hard for people to know who you are. It's hard to be genuine, and it would be somewhat of a game, I think, rather than reality if you were living that kind of existence.
I see it a lot. I mean, people at work, for sure, especially corporate America or big corporations. Absolutely, you have people hide political views. People hide really big things going on in their lives that are impacting their day to day because they don't want to seem either distracted or incapable. Uh, which is, again, probably there's certain scenarios where you don't have to tell your boss everything or you don't have to be completely transparent, but I think people do show up with masks and kind of tailor who they are to different scenarios. And it can absolutely create internal problems where you don't know your truth or your values. You kind of can go far away and lose your sense of self because you're just trying to wear the correct mask for the scenario. I mean,
And
it
so,
depends on.
do you have some guiding principles about how to overcome a tendency to hide or to someone to help someone become more authentic?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the chapters in my book, authenticity, and another one is self-advocacy. I think the two play together really strongly. Some people are really agreeable, and then those things are difficult. If you're more disagreeable, maybe it's a little bit easier, but generally people want to be polite, and sometimes they bend further than they'd like in the scenario, and then there's remorse afterwards. So definitely in coaching, a big thing is identifying your values. Another way to talk about it is I like the way that I like to talk about it is standards of integrity. So again, some principles. If you have um, religious beliefs or a moral code of some sort, and you can identify those core words, and maybe authenticity is one of them, and you have to define, okay, what does that mean for me to be authentic? Not everyone is outspoken and loud. That doesn't have to be what authenticity means. But certainly
Mm-hmm.
identifying, okay, what would it be like for me? What are some core principles that guide me? Truth or sincerity, or you can pick a word that resonates. But having 3 to 5 words like that, and then defining really what they mean in terms of living them out, I think is a great place to start. And then to hold yourself accountable to that. So to say, hey, today, did I really show up like that? Or was I kind of putting on a front? Was I wearing a mask? Where do I wear a mask? Is it at work? Is it with friends? I catch myself all the time, kind of wanting to people please in the situation rather than tuning into what I actually think or what I actually want to say, just to make the situation easier. So certainly a
Mm-hmm.
bit of an inventory at the end of the day would be good, and having your values identified, both.
I read a little bit in your book, and one of the quotes that you had there from Carl Jung that resonated with me was, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And
Yeah,
I find that that's super true for me. So if so I can be, so here's just a small simple example that happened the other day. um, we were here at home, and there were some other people here too. And one of these people went over to the fridge to get something to eat, and I said, "Well, what's he going over to the fridge for?" To myself, "What's he going over to the fridge for? What's he getting out of the fridge? Why is he doing that?" And then I thought, maybe I'm hungry. Like my paying attention to what he was doing was a cue to me that I was actually hungry, and that any judgment that I had towards him was because I was not doing something I needed for myself. Very sneaky. We are very sneaky creatures, you know? And so I thought, yes, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. I do find that that's true.
absolutely. And that's, I know the last time we spoke, there was a piece about resentment. And certainly that's, I think, where that comes from, especially in marriage, but with anyone, where it's like if someone is going after what they want or taking care of themselves, and you feel like you're putting yourself on the back burner, then it's really frustrating that your husband or your friend is able to do that, and oh, well, why can they do that? And so this resentment thing absolutely ties hand in
Yeah.
hand. I realized that a lot, that I my husband would go and work out regularly or do things for himself, and I thought, oh, it's nice, it must be nice that you have the time to do that. And it's like, no, maybe I need to stop working and go and do a walk or go to a yoga or swimming or whatever it is. And so definitely it's a good mirror.
Yeah. So I wonder how often, not just resentment, but self, any of the selfish um, tendencies that we have are a mirror for us to see what we're not doing in our lives. I imagine it's even broader than that. So fear, for instance, I think fear is something, you're afraid of the future. Resentment, you're angry about something that has happened in the past. But resentment can also be something about the present too, right? It can be a present problem, but it may have come from things that you have maybe not come to terms with in the past. But fear is definitely a future fear for other people or fear for yourself in time to come. And we really have to do a lot of self-reflection, don't you think, in order to come in contact with those emotions and understand that they are really that they need a lot more need a lot more attention. They need attention in trying to understand why you have them, not necessarily affirming that you have them, but why you have them.
Absolutely. It's a big distinction with fear, because if people come to me and they want to switch a job or leave a job, there's a certain amount of, okay, there's change. And so with change comes some level of fear because, well, what will this be like? Trying to anticipate. And so I think the biggest thing I can do with clients is sort of map out, okay, what are the scenarios, what the potential scenarios if they want a promotion or they want to switch. It's like, okay, creating a plan that you don't have to have every step mapped out, but certainly a couple of them. Like, okay, well, I'm going to start applying to jobs, and then I'll have some conversations and informational interviews to get a sense of things. And then I'll have some interviews. Knowing what's ahead to some degree, having a bit of a framework is nice, because often fear of the future will stop you in your tracks. You won't even take the first few steps. And that's really where coaching, I think, can be great, where it's you identify that point B, you see where you're at point A, you see maybe why you're afraid, and then you start taking some action, because without action, you can swirl around in fears for, I mean, indefinitely. You can ruminate about the multitude of risks and issues that could occur. And most of the time, they don't come to be. That's the thing, right? Like, we worry so much about what could go wrong, and yet most of those things don't ever actually happen. So if we can get into action, even small steps, I think that's a very strong benefit of coaching, is having someone that you're accountable to yourself, but you have someone checking in, and you're identifying small things that week to week can move the project or move the initiative forward even a little bit, so that
Mm-hmm.
you have a vision and then you're actively walking toward it and dealing with the setbacks as they actually arise, not the hypothetical and infinite list of problems that could occur. And again, that's not just at work, that's with every possible goal you might have, I think.
Yes. Well, what I'm hearing you say is that to instead of worrying and having fear, to try to be present, and take the next right step,
Yeah,
because
just
action
one.
is where it's at.
Well, just one. Yeah, the very next thing. And certainly, I mean, for me, and I have to thank you again for this, bringing me back to, I was raised Catholic, and so bringing me back to my faith. My grandmother taught me how to pray, and for me, there is a faith component for sure of, okay, it's not just me deciding the next right step. It's also getting quiet and praying and hearing what the next right step could be, because sometimes logically the right next step either doesn't appear or it feels wrong. There's a feeling component and a logic component. And I really like to work with clients in the masculine and feminine energy, or that emotional, logical, you can say conscious, unconscious. But I really like to work in both spaces. And so while we can make a logical plan, there is the mysterious and the unknown piece of it. And as I said, I do have to credit you for really bringing me back to that. I thought I didn't need prayer or the church. Certainly in my early 20s, it was like, that wasn't cool, or what do I need? What do I need that for? But
Mm-hmm.
amidst really more the fertility side of things, of finally getting to this point in pregnancy, but wanting to become a mom, there no amount of logic was able to help in that scenario for me, and so had to really come back to it. And you really started that for me a few years ago. So thank you.
Well,
And also, that's a
you're
big part of my
welcome.
process now. A huge part of my process now is also, yes, take the very right next step, but don't just, it's not just about consulting the logical action plan. It is about checking in with God's will, and kind of listening, receiving a little bit of what is right for the next step, not just trying to control it myself. The
So
balance.
get that feeling that you're moving in the right direction, rather than this kind of push feeling. I'm going to move it this way and move it that way, like that. That's, you got to question that, because that is more self-will than God's will.
Yeah, I really like to think that I was controlling things. I really thought I could, or I was, and the
Yeah.
past 4 years have shown me, in my experience at the very least, that yeah, make a plan, have a vision, take the right next step, keep looking toward your vision, but plans, timelines, the how of how things occur. You can have a what in mind. Okay, I'd like to have a child. I'd like to get married. I'd like to start a business. You can have that in mind, but I think how it unfolds, I've had to have a looser grip or lighter hands on the how, and
Mm-hmm.
the prayer piece and the church piece has helped with that, because I like to think I'm in control.
So have you gone back to a regular church service?
Yeah, lately, the incense for some reason really gets to me during pregnancy. I don't know what that's about. But I, yes, and praying the rosary, and actually, I was excited to chat with you about this Bible study. It's all about Mary that
Mm-hmm.
the church is running. It's a church nearby, and I happened to stumble upon it, and the timing was so good because I'm pregnant, and I felt really connected to Mary, and that's been a fascinating study of just Mary as the new covenant, and everything that she represents has been so, her as a vessel for God is such a fascinating thing for me, because not to directly compare myself to Mary, but to say I've felt like, I mean, this baby is an absolute miracle, and I do feel like it's God's creation within me and this absolute blessing, and I could not control the timing of this whatsoever. And so, yes, the study of Mary has been really helpful for me to as a model, as a to try to be like Mary has been a really great model for me lately.
So an ideal. So I see that as an idea of striving for an ideal. Another, it's a vision again, right? It's a vision again of what could be. And so, why do people need that? Why do people need vision, and why do they have to aspire to be like someone like Mother Mary? What is, why is it important to us, and how does it make us feel to do that compared to not having that?
I think it's a good question. People can trial and error that for themselves, and I feel to me, it's a lost feeling if I don't have someone to look up to. It's sort of, again, those core values that we're talking about, or standards of integrity, those core elements of who do I want to show up as, who am I, what guides me. If there's nothing identified there, you feel lost, and that's problematic, because then how do you make choices? And if you only make choices based on how you feel in the moment, then, well, you're going to feel different in every moment. And so there's nothing, it's
Mm-hmm.
not a solid foundation. So to have someone like Mother Mary, who, it's not just a passing fad or something, I think Mary, Jesus, and Joseph as a unit, as a family unit, is such a strong, enduring symbol of what family can be, should be, that it feels solid, and if you don't have that, and it doesn't have to be Catholicism. I think if you want to identify your own, again, morals or values, that can work too. For me, it's worked with Mother Mary, because, again, this idea of being a vessel, I really wanted to control my body. I didn't want to have miscarriages. I wanted this baby. I wanted this baby before 30. I wanted it to be a certain way, and thinking I could control my body in a way, rather than surrendering to God's will and saying, okay, I would love to have a baby. Let's see how this let's see how this turns out. What's the right next step? Should we adopt? Is it about fostering? Am I trying to force this in a way that's not meant to be? And then I looked at a foster and adoption agency and then found out I had had a miscarriage in February, looked at an adoption and fostering program in March, and then found out I was pregnant around my birthday, early April. So it just,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things that miracles like that, to me, there's no question there's a God when things like that happen. And then to be able to look to Mother Mary and say, okay, how do I navigate this with grace, with surrender, with trusting His will, not mine? How do I, if I go back and have a blueprint, it's much easier than feeling like I have to make that all up as I go. So it helps to have a blueprint in the form of a person who's done that successfully, no matter if it's with children or running a business. It's great to have a mentor, someone that's done what you'd like to do, so you have a blueprint, I think.
Well, it's hard enough to be a new mother, and wonder about what to do, how to navigate this very important job that you've all of a sudden got, and there's no days off, there's no sick days, there's no weekends away. This is your job for at least the next 20 years, every day of your life and every night of your life. It's a wild ride. It's a wild ride. And when I first had kids, I wasn't looking to scripture. I wasn't looking to scripture, so I wasn't getting my inspiration consciously that way. I think that God is always there, and He's always guiding. And so even though we stumble along, He's nudging us in the right direction as much as He can. And hopefully we pay attention at some point and start to straighten out our lives, right? We try to stay. So even if you have a baby and you feel like, oh my goodness, this is new, and unknown, and I feel very, very responsible, and what am I going to do? I remember when we had our first baby, it was like, okay, it's just really one moment at a time. And I wanted the baby. So in a way, I was ready. Because I wanted the baby, I was ready. So I answered to the baby. Baby would cry, I'd be there. I'd pay attention. What's wrong? And I'd be with the baby so that I knew what was wrong. And you'll just know what's wrong. Because if you pay attention, right? If you pay attention, then you'll know what the next calling is that's coming from this little baby who only has cries and tiny little movements, and because the baby is just becoming. So it's almost like a whisper, right? It's almost like a whisper. So you have to be really attentive and always open to whatever information you can get from this little creature. And so, yeah, there's a lot of paying attention. And
Yeah.
I think if you do that, and with your husband there, so that you can negotiate and talk about the process and what you need and everything, you'll be as good as any other parents. Like, everybody goes through this, right? It's hard to believe, right? Everybody goes through this. This is what you'll know when you have a baby. You'll go down, you'll have this stroller, and you'll have the baby in a carrier or something, and you'll go down the street, and people that you've walked by 1,000 times every day, they'll stop and they'll say, oh, a baby, oh my goodness. And then they turn into a mother, or they turn into a father. And you see that everyone who has been a mother or a father, you are now a part of their club. And so that's going to happen, like, right away for you.
I feel even I did want to ask you about your pregnancies, because you're saying to pay attention. And I think, especially now with the uncertainty, I mean, when there's a physical baby in front of you, there's this realness to that. And certainly, I mean, I feel her kicking around and moving around at this point, and that's reassuring. But I definitely wanted to ask you during pregnancy, because I've noticed both things around awareness and also just people, even though I'm pregnant, the baby's not even here yet. It's like, oh, how are you doing? And they're already sort of when are you due, and how, is it a girl, do you have a name, and people are already sort of really excited about it. So I did want to ask you about, because you've spoken about parenting, but if there's anything around pregnancies that was reassuring to you or helpful, because it does feel, it feels more real when there's a baby in your arms. When it's just my belly getting bigger and bigger, and there's a realness to that. But certainly, and even my husband, right, who, I mean, he can see that in me, but he's not experiencing the physicality of it in the same way at all, because he's not carrying the baby. So I was curious about the pregnancy part, because I think there's a lot of faith that has gone into, I mean, certainly there's risk and uncertainty even when the baby's born, but there's this, in pregnancy, it really is this creation in the darkness of the womb where no one can see it, and for so many months even, really no one can see it or know, and there's a lot of uncertainty and potential fear and these risks, and depending on your story, if you've had losses or trouble to get pregnant, there's so much emotion wrapped in it, and there isn't this baby to pay attention to outside of yourself. It's really, I'm one with this, I'm considered one person at the moment, and yet there's this whole life within me. So I'm definitely
Mm-hmm.
curious about how, just anything you noticed during your pregnancies or how that was, because it feels like a lot of uncertainty throughout this 9 month
Well, I
experience.
imagine having the miscarriages that you've had. How many miscarriages have you had? Can I ask you that?
For
Four, like that's wow, you were persistent, right? You persevered, which is part of the part of the biblical narrative is perseverance in in um, in times of need, in times of stress, right? To persevere. That's what we're called to do, is to persevere. So you've persevered. So you are doing what you're called to do, what God calls you to do, which has got to be somewhat give you a feeling of security, because even though it's obviously risky to have a baby, I think that it's women who die in childbirth go to historically have gone to the same graveyards as men who've died in battle. So,
oh,
it's of all the things women do, this is the pinnacle of our achievements. We know we don't think that anymore. We think of our achievements as what we do in the working world and stuff, but really, if you look historically at childbirth, women who have died in childbirth, they have been given the highest honor because they have given themselves. They've sacrificed themselves for their baby. And even if you don't die, and most of us don't die anymore because medical care is so great and nutrition is quite good, and I think it could use some work, but as we're finding out now. But still, this sacrifice that we're making for our baby, because you're sacrificing all your time. That's what you're going to be doing at the very beginning, is just sacrificing all your time. All your time is going to be for your baby. That's what we're called to do. That's what life is about sacrifice. That's, you don't have a family without sacrifice, because you have to give to one another. And so so even just the baby being inside you right now, you're sacrificing your ease of movement,
oh.
right? And
I mean, for 4 years, this is this baby, but my body is completely different from 4 years ago, because I've had multiple pregnancies and going through pregnancy after pregnancy, the hormones, it's not even just this year. It's not even just 9 months. It's really 4 years of repeated hormonal, physical, emotional upheaval, the grief of it all. I mean, yeah, it's not
mhm.
even just these 9 months. It's like 4 years of feeling like work matters, but to your point, I mean, not even close to what I'm doing here. It's a big reason why I think in the coaching side of things, especially working with anyone younger, kind of under 30, um, mapping out the motherhood piece. No one talked to me about motherhood or being pregnant. It was, I grew up in Toronto. I went to high school. I went to a great all girls school there that it was all about getting, as you said, right? Go to university. I went to the University of Toronto, get a good job or open your business. There was no discussion of, well, when do you think you should have kids? I mean, I was 25 and had never thought about it. Real, I mean, I knew I wanted kids at some point down the road, but there was no timeline or feeling that that should be a part of my career plan or my life plan, that I had to plan it at all. At all. No one said a single thing to me. It was always about grades and a job. And so I'm definitely weaving that into the work I do at the university level whenever I coach, if I do any university programming, for women specifically, because I think it's critical to think about. I mean, your body has a certain timeline that you can always go and work more. But the biggest, from my clients, the pain and regret I see in clients that are in their later 40s, women are getting pregnant in their early 40s, that I see. But kind of, if someone's 44 or beyond, the women there that don't have children, it's, they're devastated. Like, and they really have to, they struggle. And if they do have kids, if they don't have a partner, I mean, it's a really difficult thing to be childless and not because you chose it, involuntarily childless. These clients, and even for myself, I mean, I'm 32 and thank God that this is working. But for 4 years, it's been really hard to see all my friends having kids and feeling like, is this going to happen? So I really think we need to be talking about it, even in, I don't know about high school, but certainly at the university level, in career
Yeah,
path
I think high
planning.
school. I think high school. What do you think? I mean, kids when they're, I mean, girls. Another thing is girls are going through it. They're becoming women younger and younger, so they're going through um, adolescence, younger and younger. There's got to be something in that that's saying there's an urgency. There's an urgency to the family life, a calling to the family life, and who knows, maybe because we haven't been answering that call, it's becoming more urgent, and so it's getting younger. I mean, I don't know how to understand it medically, but in terms of um, more spiritually or more, or just watching, we are definitely, girls are becoming fertile younger. There's a reason for that, and I know that fatherlessness is part of that. If there's no father around, then it would be better if you found a husband and had a baby, because then you'd have a man in your life again. And so, and that's happening to us in our bodies, not in our conversation, but really in our bodies. So yes, we need to talk about this. We need to plan for it, because
Yeah,
it's the biggest adventure in life is to have a baby.
it's certainly been for me. It's been it's been a
Oh, and it
winding.
will be now. It'll be that way now for I mean, my kids are now in their 30s and they have children. That's a big adventure for me now too. Even though it's not exactly my adventure, I get to be a part of that. And I can't think of anything better, and neither can my husband.
I actually think that's really underrated as well. As I told you, my grandmother taught me how to pray, and she was really a primary caregiver when my mom went back to work, and I was there every day until I went to kindergarten, and even then they would take me. So at 4 or 5 years old, I was with them every day, and I think that's, I'm not sure what it is about the boomer generation, but it's this sort of tendency of like, well, I have a life kind of thing that I hear a lot, because I do work with also that age group where it's like retiring or finding the kind of next career or sort of a part-time career as they find purpose after their maybe main corporate, or after having kids and their kids are grown up. There's this next phase of career life. Um,
Hmm.
and my grandmother was so, talk about sacrifice. I mean, I was there every day, 7 a.m., and she took care of me the whole day until they'd pick me up. And that relationship was so important. I think that's what really gave me the grounding. My parents would take me to church, and they're both Catholic, and there was but the the trusting God and the prayer. My parents would pray with me every night, but my grandmother really was she held to that. She had rosaries. My grandparents have the last supper above their dining room table. Like it's really entrenched in their belief system. And I don't think I would have gotten that as strongly if it wasn't for my relationship with my grandparents. So I see a lot of, especially people move into different states or different countries. You're far from, your family of origin, and there isn't that grandparent relationship. And I think it's really important. I do think it's what you're able to do with being with your grandkids is different from what the parents can do. There's a special
Yeah.
relationship.
Oh yeah,
That's what
it's
I
different.
experienced.
Yeah, when I show up at my daughter's house or my son's house, those little kids have an affinity to grandma and grandpa that we haven't done anything special to deserve that kind of attention. They just are. They have an innate trust of the people that are my son's wife. Her mother passed away, but she grew up with her aunt. They have that same relationship with her. They just know who is important, and those grandparents, that they're important. And when I was a little kid, I only saw my grandparents probably monthly. For a while they lived close to us, and then I saw them quite a bit, but most of the time when I grew up, I had to travel a 6-hour drive to see them. But we would go monthly, and even that amount of being with my grandparents was wonderful and supportive and memorable, and everything that I hoped it would be. So I know that people aren't often together, but you can come together on a kind of a regular basis. Like monthly is a pretty good, if you can get together monthly. Even my sister lived a 90-mile drive from my parents when I was in high school and she had little kids. And we saw them monthly. It didn't matter that they were only an hour and a half drive away, and that when I flew to Ottawa, which was 3,000 miles away, sometimes I saw my parents as often as my sister saw my parents an hour and a half away. So you just have to decide how often you want to see one another and kind of work that relationship. Just try to pin down a routine with grandparents so that they see that even if it's not every day or even once a week, that it's once every 2 weeks. And if it is, then try to hold to that. Try to hold that and maintain whatever routine that you can set up. And I think well, kids will just love that, and it'll be something that they remember in their entire lives, right? So, yeah, I think grandparents are, well, in Hungary, they have new tax laws trying to encourage family. And one of the things that they have is if a mother has one baby, then she pays 25% less income tax for the rest of her life if
Good
she's in a
deal.
married relationship with her husband. And if she has 2 children, 50%, 3 children, 75%, 4 children, 100%, no more income tax for the rest of her life. And if a grandmother or grandfather takes care of the child, then they're exempt from a portion of their income tax. So they're really trying to encourage these relationships and to give back funding to families so that they can better navigate this expensive life that has happened now that men and women both work. It's much more expensive, right? So, but
Oh yeah, that's a
we could
huge.
we could learn from that.
Absolutely. I'm astounded every time because I'm in the US at the moment, but I'm Canadian, and so even just the differences between Canada and the US, they're like women here will go back to work after 6 weeks, and it's like I just took it as a given that people stay home at least a year because that's what it is in Canada. But there's so much variability around the world in terms of maternity leave and how governments prioritize or what funding they give. Do you get some of your salary? And I'm not an expert in this space, but certainly, again, I see a lot of new moms that are back in the workforce and they're talking about their career. I don't have a solid stat, but I would say my my gut is more than half of them. Some women really just want to get back to work and that they're okay with it, and if that's you, that's great. But most of them are they really struggle with how quickly they have to go back. They really struggle with caring about the work. Like, it doesn't feel important when you have a 6 week old at home to be going to meetings or answering emails or doing reports. It's just like, who cares? I have this kid that this baby that really needs me. And so there's a huge emotional component. They really struggle. They don't want to advance as much. I find, like, if I'm coaching, there's a very different approach and priority set if I'm coaching someone with kids versus without, and especially new moms. There's just the priorities are completely different. They want flexibility. They want to probably work from home or have the capacity to do that some days a week. And again, I don't think the corporate world always allows for that, but I also don't think women plan as much. They think, oh, I'll handle it all just fine. But there's a trade-off in any direction. If they stay at home, there is a career trade-off. If they go back to work, there's this bonding piece that they really miss out on. And I don't know that, at least in the US and Canada, I don't know that it's fully figured out. Women still, I have clients in Canada, they struggle even after a year. They're going, I don't want to go back. Or they'll go back, they'll work the minimum amount of hours, they'll get pregnant again just so they can go on mat leave again and then be with the two kids. I think if we had more supportive policies saying, like in Serbia, actually, if you have a second kid, you can, I believe it's 3 years. Austria for sure has programming like that as well, that you can take 3 years with your kids. And I think we'd be better off. I mean, I think the kids would be better off.
Why? Do you know why it's 3 years?
I know Erica Commissar's work. I actually saw her in San Antonio speaking, and I think her work is interesting. When I chat with moms, sometimes there's this kind of mom guilt idea. Like, if they're not taking the 3 years, they feel really. I think her work is brilliant. Some moms, I think, feel attacked by it, or that if they don't take the 3 years, they're doing it really wrong, and so they kind of don't want to hear it. But her work is brilliant, and I wish there was a way for more women to plan for that time. It's such a set. It's just but it's 3 years in a 20-year career, or a 25 or a 30-year career. Like, it's a blip of an eye. You can always go back to work. What I've seen, it will take some time, and you might have to upgrade some skills. Right? There might be
and
certification.
Erica, she talks about attachment theory, right?
Yeah.
She talks about attachment theory and that it takes 3 years for babies to become, or small children to become fully attached. And so I've been watching. So Mick has a 10-year-old or 10-month-old baby. And so I was sitting in the living room, and this little guy was scooting around. He wasn't yet crawling. He was more like, I guess, between 8 and 9 months. But he was scooting around. But he would go maybe for not long, not even half a minute, like 15 seconds probably, and then he'd turn around and he'd look at me. And then he'd go a little further, and then he'd look at me. He's always trying to find, is this okay? Is this the right thing to do? Getting feedback about his behavior as he's learning to engage with the world, wondering what's the right thing to do and what's the wrong thing to do. And the only one who knows is my mom. Really, that's the only one who knows. And so they look back, and if it's always a different person in a daycare, as Erica says, then the baby doesn't know who to look to for feedback. And so then they end up having more anxiety because they're not sure. They don't have a good foundation of what is something that they should avoid and what is something they should go towards. It's as simple as that. And
which is
so,
fascinating.
you can have someone, you can have a grandmother, right? You can have a grandmother in the house, but it has to be someone who's solidly there and doesn't change. So,
Yeah, I think it's interesting because before you were talking about with me, right, Mother Mary and having that blueprint or models, having models, and it what you're saying to me says, yeah, that's from the very beginning, and the best models or the best people to look up to are the parents and then the grandparents and then based on her research. But so it's interesting, we're constantly kind of looking to others to just regulate and see, okay, how does this work? I mean, how to, right? And so he's looking back at you saying,
mhm,
is this okay, grandma? Can I? And here I am in my 30s looking to you or to Mother Mary or to other moms in my peer group and saying, okay, how are we going to navigate this? And that makes it, I think it's useful data to not go it alone. I think there's this isolation that's happening when we just, if we're just googling or we're just trying to discern everything from our own understanding. I think, yes, we have wisdom, internal wisdom, and we have to build trust in our own abilities, but we're so interconnected, and somehow there's this thought in the West of independence, that I think independence is important, but we also need each other. We also need that reference point, people to look up to. The baby needs mom or grandma. I need models. It helps us to walk our path, to carve a path that makes sense. I
mhm.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
It
I
starts
think
right with babies.
well, that's community, isn't it? And we used to find our community in the church. Historically, we found our community in the church, and people aren't going to churches often. So then, where is their community? Well, community can be family, and it's been family historically. It's been family, and it's been more broadly, it's been the church. But we can, if we realize how important community is, because we need feedback. We need feedback on what we're doing. And we need people we can trust to show who we are, and then accept what the feedback is going to be from what we're doing. And then, hopefully then, because they're people who are in our community, then they'll have virtues and use them, kindness and truth, and like honesty is a big deal when you're trying to deal with something new, like having a baby. You need honest communication with other people so that you know that you're making the right choices, or even just verifying that you're making the right choices with your baby. Because we're all, like you said, we're all looking at each other to find out if we're making the right choices.
Yeah. And that's to your point about the church. I think those shared, we talked about even as an individual identifying, okay, what values are important to me. I think what church helps with, or any community, is there's an understanding that you have similar values. And so you can trust their feedback because, hey, we do value honesty, or we do value faith in God. We value, there's some shared values. And so then you can trust that community's, the standards or what they expect of you or how things operate. You can trust that because, hey, there's a meeting of the minds. We agree on some core tenets of how things should be
Mm-hmm.
operating. Certainly, I never, again, if you asked me 10 years ago, I would have never said, oh, we're going to move, we'll be in Austin, Texas, and we're going to be a part of the Catholic Church in that community. Like that, just, I'm going to go to Bible study every Tuesday night. That would just, if you asked me that at 21, I was working online, traveling, living in Brazil. Like I was just in such a, I would have never given you that answer. But it's proven to be instrumental in feeling like we have grounding, like we have people around us that have shared values and will tell us, or kind of everyone is expecting similar things from each other. It's been wonderful because we don't have family nearby. And so to have
Mm-hmm.
that community has been very grounding and supportive in a new town. I wonder how you do that when you're on the road. Of course, there are online communities, like when I was traveling a lot, I really relied on online communities. But do you go to Do you go to church on the road? How do you stay connected?
Um, well, when I was on the road last year, I had a weekly catechism meeting with my priest online, which was really helpful,
That's
right?
good.
Because that kept me, that was very good, because then I had this weekly meeting, and sometimes I needed that meeting. And so it was very, very helpful. This year, um, I don't know how I'm going to manage that. Hopefully I can find a church on Sundays. And I also have a group of women that I meet with weekly, once a week. And it's a value-based meeting. Everybody is on the same page in terms of supporting one another and supporting themselves. And it's a reasonable place to voice your concerns, because people will just listen. There's no advice. There's
Mm.
just listening from one another. But everybody's present and listening, which is what you need.
Oh, I
That's why
think
when you go to church, it's all about listening, listening and listening, pondering, and sitting still, right? And so if you have people around you that can listen and allow you to ponder and to sit still and discern what it is that the next right step should be, it takes some time, right? It takes some patience. It takes you have all of these things that are outlined in the Bible as virtues. We have no idea just how important they are, and but they're very, very important.
I think you make two really good points. One around the need for these women's groups, whether they're similar age groups, but also these kind of, again, having those role models of different age women that have seen kind of been through the motherhood thing, can say, hey, it's not, it'll get better, or it's okay, it's not the end of the world. Like, so having peer groups, but also having those multi-generational, I think that's so important for women. I can't speak about men, but and sometimes that's missing, but I think it's great. That's a big point. And then the silence or stillness piece that you make, it's interesting. Coming to the US, there are a lot of Christian churches here that I had never been exposed to. That they'll have, a band, and in the beginning it's really kind of, there's live music and it's really loud and it sort of feels like a party or a concert. And going to some of those churches, everybody was really welcoming and friendly, but it felt so different from the reverent, quiet, contemplative Catholic church that I grew up in, where it's like, my grandmother would look at me and say, be quiet. Don't, you have to be silent. You can't be joking around or making noise. And so that's been interesting to see. I didn't see that as much in Canada growing up, that type of experience of church with, it feels like a concert or a party. So that's another thing that kind of has kept me with Catholicism, I think, versus maybe heading toward modern Christianity or the different Bible-based churches. I found that the silence and that contemplative nature of a Catholic church, and I know other churches are that way, but the reverence, I think, is so important. So that point you made is really valuable, I think, because it's, you can't think if the music's so loud that you can't hear yourself think or receive that wisdom. I have a hard time with that. It's already hard enough for me day to day with a phone and emails coming in and people and things to listen to God, and I have to make space for that to pray and things. So yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, on just the actual physical church environment, but I never realized how important that quiet and sacred component of the church is to me, to be able to connect.
Well, when I came to the States, I went to a number of different Catholic churches until I found one that had as much of the routine of Catholicism in place. So I've been to some Catholic churches where when they're preparing the host, there's no bell ringing,
Mm.
there's no choir boys, there's maybe one monk doing the sermon, and and then on Sundays there's a band. And so I went around until I found a church where it was, there were incense, there were bells, there were choir boys, there was the homily. In fact, the one that I'm going to now, there's some Latin
Oh
in
yeah.
the service as well. And I really like that. I really like that because I think for me, the more um, I can find, the more I can get in the rhythm, I think, of the um, the historical dance in the church, because it is a type of dance, right? It's even when they have the incense, there's a dance to that. You can hear it. There's a rhythm to it, and there's a rhythm up there. The priests are they have their, they do this every day. You know, they do this every day. So there's it's beautifully orchestrated, and everyone knows what they're supposed to do. And I'm learning all the prayers because I'm a new Catholic. So some of the prayers are still not memorized, but I'm getting better at it. But I love that. And I love when I go to the service on Sunday at 11, because that's when all the families come with their children. And the little tiny little kids come in and they cross themselves as they're coming into the pew. And then I see this little 7-year-old, and she's got a little kerchief over her head, and she's making her, and they're kneeling, and he's not kneeling because he wants to play. And she gently pulls him back, we're praying and you kneel. And then he doesn't again. And so she gently brings him back and puts him, and she's 7 years old, and she's got this little 3-year-old guy who's like doesn't want to be in church, and he's looking around and everything, but she's gently just put. And it's so beautiful to see this family. They're all learning the routines of the service in a way that they can understand it. It's there's just enough information for each of them to learn a little bit every day, every time they come. And then they're so unruly that they all get up and leave. And when they come back, Dad comes, and he's got shoulders, that are this wide, and he sits among them, and everybody sits straight. It was so cute. It was so cute. That's worth it for me, just to go to church and see the families and to see the children and
Yeah.
to see God working his way through those tiny little beings. I just, it's adorable. It's just adorable.
It is. It's nice to see here. There are more families, I think, here somehow. Maybe I sort of wasn't in the church much in my 20s, but in Toronto, I felt like it was sort of an older demographic, and I didn't see as many families. And somehow in the
I go
South,
I go to one
see,
in Toronto that has you know just the basic people who've been going to church for 60 years or 70 years every day at mass, but on Sundays the
you
church is
see,
full. The church is full, and there are children there. So
that's great.
I
I
see
haven't.
that. I see that in Toronto too, but maybe that's new, because
Well,
I
what do
only
you
saw
think?
that this year, right?
I'm very curious because there is this resurgence in younger people liking the Latin Mass, for example, or going back to the church. What do you think that's about? Because I mean, in my early 20s, it was like, oh, what, I don't need this. So why do you think people feel like they need it? Even a lot of celebrities, there's so many kind of people coming and saying, I'm Catholic, or they're proclaiming their faith in one way or another. And I'm definitely curious
Hmm. Yeah.
about, first of all, faith, but then it's not just that. It's like returning to these very traditional kind of, again, Catholic, or these very traditional rites, rituals, practices. Why do you think we're gravitating toward that now?
I think we have come so far away from the church that people are starting to realize that that was a mistake, and that things have gone very far astray, and that in order to come back, we need to really observe the most, the closest we can get to the Bible. We have to be a part of a ritual that's as close to the written word as we can get in order to regain this the grace of God. Really, I think people are looking for that.
Yeah, I've noticed it for sure. Again, this sort of back to basics and tradition, and it does make sense in a way. But it's been
Yeah,
interesting to see people younger, younger and younger, wanting, like, being very devout Catholics, very much so, with the veiling, little details, as you said, in Mass, wanting Latin Mass, which is hard to find, at least where I'm, and that was never really a part of my childhood. It was always in English or Croatian, but people really kind of, like you said, wanting to go back to roots, or even there's a bit of a movement I've seen with Christians, but looking at Jewish practices, or because I mean the Old Testament, there's so many Jewish principles. It's one book, but certainly the Old Testament has the Jewish piece of it, and just seeing even some Christians practicing keeping the Sabbath as a Christian, I've seen as a thing to try to get kind of closer to, okay, how did Jesus live, is kind of this trend that I'm seeing of people wanting to live like Jesus, which is an interesting. I mean, I had never heard anything, and maybe it's because I'm in Texas, I don't know, but I'd never heard anything really about that growing up. So,
well, Canada, we have a lot to learn up there. We're in a very dark place right now, still in Canada, and the states with this election. Now we have a chance to come back to more common sense ideas, and hopefully that will shine on Canada, and we'll be able to come back to more common sense ideas up there too, because we have a lot of work to do up there to bring things back to a place of common sense and goodness.
yeah, I the biggest thing I've noticed, which is interesting even in following this election, is that the big cities vote in a completely different way from kind of everyone, at least in Austin, as one example. The city votes in one direction, but then all the counties around it are completely different. And what I've noted, and Republican, and the cities are Democrat. And I find it interesting. I think the more we go local, my husband is Swiss, and so in Switzerland, I mean, they'll vote on a cantonal level, which is tiny, tiny compared to how huge each state is. Um,
Hmm.
to me, I noticed that in Switzerland they do a great job because there's this local component. Like, the more local people can get about their involvement. I mean, everyday people. I mean, I'm not a politician, and I that's a whole other can of worms. But I just mean for the everyday person. Sometimes people feel a sense of despair, or like, what can I do? Or this feels, how can I impact any of these policies or changes, when it feels like I have no real say past an election day? What do I do now? The election happened. Now what? And I again, if I go back to coaching principles, it's like, okay, what is in your control? And the biggest thing I see is in these small towns. I mean, the town we live in is 10,000 people or so, the town itself. And it's astounding. There's a women's club. They have the local fire department, the local police department. Like, people really come together when it's on these smaller levels. The church helps locally with different, either lower income or drug problems, or different, like, single mothers. They have these programs that at a 10,000 person level, you can really like, I can really make a difference. I can go and volunteer and actually see how I'm helping my direct community. And that feels really good, and like I actually can do something. Because if I think about all of the United States, or all of Canada, or the whole world, it feels almost
Overwhelming.
insurmountable.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um,
absolutely.
so I wonder if there's certainly, again, we chose a smaller town for that reason, is I wanted to be able to feel like, hey, we know our neighbors, we know the people in our community, we have a church community where people know who I am, they know us. We talk, we go to a fall festival, and we see 20 people we know, and we've only been here for a few months. So I wanted that for myself, for our kids, and uh, but I think that's where, if people feel some sense of of where's my power or what can I do, I think going local has been really reassuring for me when things feel insurmountable
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
politically.
that's a good idea. And I think there might be some movement back to smaller cities, towns. I think there might be, even in Canada, I think we're starting to see people leaving the cities, partly because people don't, with working more online, people, they don't have to live in the city anymore. So we'll see
They
what
can't afford
happens,
it.
right?
They can't. You can't
And
afford.
can't afford it. Yeah, right, right, right.
I mean, yeah. So I think that's an interesting full circle thought from the beginning, just around this the self leadership piece, whether it is at least for me in motherhood or my local community or at work. It's really been to identify, okay, what's in my control, then where do I realize it's not my will but God's will, and then also a bit of having having a vision and holding loosely to how it comes to be, I think have been my main themes over the past few years when a lot feels.
And it looks like it's working well for you too.
I'm certainly, I mean, there's a baby on the way. We have a home, we have a town, we have our families, we have decently good health. It feels like, yeah, things. And I was on, even with my car accident, like you said, God will let you know. Like I was on a bit of a road. I was traveling a lot. I wasn't thinking about family or marriage or any of that. And then I had a bad car accident. I sustained a concussion, and then from that also brought me back to thinking not as much from my ego and more of a place of service, more of a place of, okay, maybe I should think about settling down or having a family and those things. So God, I'm a bit stubborn, but God has brought me back to what's right. I think sometimes with louder nudges than others. I'm trying to
Right.
listen without trying to listen without the, huge messages needing to be sent. But yeah, I if I can keep going down the path that he wants, I think it'll be a good.
I think it'll be great. Who knows where it'll go? There's no end to up. If there's no end to down, there's no end to up. So
That's true. Well,
yeah,
I'll have to I mean, it's only a few more weeks. I'll have to.
yeah. Well, let me know. Keep me in keep me in touch so that I find out what the result is and can congratulate you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I mean, since we met, this has been my biggest project since we first met. So I'm finally turning the corner.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm so happy. I'm so happy to hear that. It's yeah, you persevered. Good for you, man. Really good.
Well, thanks again for having me. You've been, even from afar, you've been such a motivating model for me as to what I'd like to embody, from the patience, the faith piece, the motherhood piece. It's been really nice to, and I'm so glad you do the podcast more, because it's so nice to have your thoughts and your perspective on how we might approach this that isn't just mainstream, okay, go back to work, or some of these mainstream narratives. It's nice to have a model that says, no, you can stay home, or no, here's how I did the mothering thing, or here's how the faith piece can come into the picture. it's it's
Hmm.
been really nice to have that in you as I've been persevering, as I've been trying to get to this point. So I'm just glad that
Yeah. Oh,
you're.
good for you. Yeah. Yeah. So all the best to you and your husband, and good luck with your baby.
Thank you, and
Let me
thanks
know.
for having.
My pleasure.